the one moral, the one remedy for every evil, social, political, financial, and industrial, the one immediate vital need of the entire Republic is the Pacific Railroad. Rocky Mountain News, 1866.
America was in a hurry. It was a time of expansion, opportunity, and destiny. The United States were divided by a majestic, often perilous expanse of land, the American frontier. Throughout the 19th century, Americans and European immigrants alike flocked to the Wild West in search of freedom and fortune. But the issue of transportation loomed large over the area, and the lack of it undoubtedly discouraged many from settling the great unknown. America needed a bridge over this vast expanse, a bridge made of blood, iron, and steel, the Transcontinental Railroad. The invention of the steam locomotive at the turn of the 19th century was an extraordinary achievement in the world of transportation. This exciting advancement in transit greatly increased the efficiency of transportation and quickly made its way to America. The new machine was especially relevant considering the United States' immense amount of territory and its seemingly endless resources. A new network of train tracks ensured the imminent settling of the frontier and furthered the spirit of Manifest Destiny. Unfortunately, the railroad's expediency also ensured the exploitation of Western resources, while its efficiency in transporting goods meant a strengthened United States economy. America would inevitably build a railroad to span the continent, a transcontinental railroad. The history of this groundbreaking achievement was not without problems, but it would eventually be completed as an engineering marvel and even inspire similar efforts elsewhere. Through its mighty powers of speed, efficiency, and popularity, the Transcontinental Railroad would transform Western society, influence the lives of American immigrants, forever alter the Wild West, and expand America's economic power. The history of the Transcontinental Railroad is shaped by bribery, regional disagreements, and the dire need for an improvement of overland trade. Selecting a route for the railroad was challenging. Disagreements between Northerners and Southerners on the best route for the new railroad caused multiple bills to fail in the 1850s. This problem continued through 1853, when 5 surveying teams were sent by Congress to select the best route. But the result of this study found that the railroad would be most beneficial if constructed in the South. Northern legislators would not allow this to happen, and a route was not selected, though the Southern Pacific Railroad would eventually be built on that route. Finally, the South seceded in 1861, led by South Carolina, and the now completely Northern Congress immediately passed a bill to begin construction of the Pacific Railroad. Thus, on June 20th, 1862, the first Transcontinental Railroad was signed into existence by President Abraham Lincoln with the Pacific Railroad Bill. It authorized the Union Pacific Railroad to begin construction near the Missouri River and the Central Pacific Railroad in California. The intent was to meet somewhere in the middle to complete the entire rail line. Both companies were granted land and bonds by the U.S. government for each mile of track laid. Thomas C. Durant, vice president of the Union Pacific Railroad Company, created additional problems during construction. He promised senators generous stock benefits if they would vote on a revised Pacific Railroad bill, illegally bribing them to benefit himself. Durant gave upwards of $400,000 in benefits to these senators, and so the railroad bill was revised to double land grants and increase the railroad company's power, and therefore the power of Durant. Despite many hindrances, the first Transcontinental Railroad was completed on May 10, 1869, in Utah, a great American accomplishment that would lead to other railroads that would span the nation and solve a transportation crisis. The overland trade at this time was hazardous and expensive, and the railroad fixed this by increasing speed and efficiency to lower costs. For instance, when Lewis and Clark made their journey, it took 2.5 years to cross the continent. The railroad took a mere 9 days. Thus, The railroad would become a distinguishing aspect of America despite the challenges along the way. The completion of the Transcontinental Railroad had a monumental effect on Western society. Improvements in the availability of resources due to the steam locomotive allowed the Western population to start moving away from rural settlements and begin to urbanize, as the East had. During construction, the train route was lined by small mining towns and boom settlements. These temporary towns consisted mostly of tents and movable structures that could easily be transported down the route. Known for lawlessness, these towns often contained saloons and dance halls for the entertainment of the hard-working, single men that constructed the rails. However, the life of the towns was short-lived. After the completion of the railroad, the West now began to produce the metropolises that exist today, such as Seattle, San Francisco, and Los Angeles, highlighting the railroad's effect on Western society. For instance, in 1852, the population of California was about 92,000. In 1880, that number had jumped to over 500,000. However, not all populations experienced growth. The Transcontinental Railroad put a dagger through the heart of the Native American way of life. Thousands upon thousands of Sioux Indians and other Plains tribes were displaced to make way for the westward expansion. But while there were horrible effects such as the destruction of the Indian culture, the first Transcontinental Railroad would shape the development of society dominating the American West. The Transcontinental Railroad's effect on immigrants in America is clearly visible through the employment that its construction helped create, and also its long-term effect on the moving of immigrants west into the frontier. The most immediate result of the railroad was the massive number of laborers it required during construction. The Central Pacific Railroad satisfied the demand by employing over 12,000 Chinese immigrants, together making up for 80% of the railroad's workforce. Asa Whitney, a major promoter of the railroad project, had proposed using immigrant labor and paying workers in land to promote Western development. Although this was never put into legislation by Congress, many immigrants were hired to complete the enormous government-funded project. The hardworking Chinese laborers toiled in the Sierra Nevada mountains for a mere $28 per month. They worked in a constant threat of danger from the dynamite blasting and the treacherous environment of the mountainous region. On the other side of the Great West, the Union Pacific Railway was also in dire need of workers to build the eastern half of the rail line. However, the labor in the east was provided mainly by Irishmen. Many of these Irish were Civil War veterans looking for work after the war. These laborers did not suffer discrimination and were paid a slightly higher wage of $35 per month, but they too worked in dangerous conditions. Native Americans organized attacks on work crews in an attempt to hinder the advance of American expansion. The railroad was a direct threat to their culture and existence, and many tribes were willing to kill to protect their way of life. The railroad, once finally completed, provided for a surge of westward expansion, much of this population consisting of immigrants. These immigrants could travel directly from the eastern seaports they came to the frontier to begin a new life in the West. Even railroad companies promoted this idea, hoping that increased western population would mean more railroad traffic. The effect that the railroad had on immigrants began as a simple employment opportunity, but soon developed into a much larger aspect of America. The first Transcontinental Railroad advanced the immigration process of America and sped the settlement of the West by many of these immigrants. The Great American West was and still is considered one of the most majestic places on the planet, and the railroad led to its exploitation but also protected it by making the frontier much more accessible. The western deserts, mountains, and rivers helped cast an expansionist fever over the young nation. This fever was the spirit of manifest destiny, the idea that it was the God-given right of the United States of America to stretch from sea to shining sea. At the moment, the country really was stretching, and yet it would take weeks or even months to travel across the frontier. The West was also a place rich in resources, vast forests and fields of minerals that stretched from north to south along the jagged Rockies. The Transcontinental Railroad helped to make these resources increasingly available to the nation. A journey from the East Coast to San Francisco would have previously taken months, and now took only 9 days. Although it helped the American economy tremendously, the railroad encouraged the destruction of the West. By the early 1900s, 90% of America's forests had been cut down. Americans also started the cruel practice of shooting buffalo from train windows. Some 4.5 million buffalo were killed between 1872 and 1874 alone. They were hunted to near extinction. However, the railroad also helped to save the West. With the frontier now available for exploration, Americans soon found that it was truly a unique place. The Transcontinental Railroad opened America's eyes to the beauty of the West, and many soon sought out to protect it. Conservation efforts would take years to be realized, but the beauty of the West was unlocked through the steam locomotive. While the first Transcontinental Railroad had the immediate effects of exploiting the frontier, it also inspired naturalists to take the initiative to conserve its true magnificence. This new, faster way of travel helped the economy develop through increased utilization of the now accessible West and through the increased amount of trade it provided. The first Transcontinental Railroad shipped $50 million worth of freight each year. The revenue that the railroad generated in turn helped to develop a new infrastructure that later formed the backbone of large American business. In the past, most raw materials such as gold, iron, and copper had to be loaded onto small caravans and transported across the nation to factories in the East. This system kept prices high and hindered the industrial capacity of the nation. When the first Transcontinental Railroad was completed, massive amounts of resources could now be moved from the West at a greatly increased speed. This improved national infrastructure impacted the country in several ways. First, it allowed for lower shipping costs, allowing consumer prices to drop. This let more people buy the previously expensive goods made from the Western materials, which supplied more cash to the economy and increased industrial production. Therefore, the new method of transportation gave more profits to traders who made a large portion of the American economy. Another impact was the creation of new industries that were required to develop the railroad. The steel industry got a massive boost from the construction of the railroad, with the Union Pacific alone requiring 1,087 miles of track. These huge demands helped to generate more money for the national economy. This sped America along the path of industrial revolution, and because it increased industrial capacity and trade, the U.S. is still an industrial power today. The Transcontinental Railroad helped utilize Western resources and increase trade. It helped enlarge industrial capacity by improving the infrastructure that facilitated it, and also by resolving many problems in economic efficiency. The first Transcontinental Railroad drastically impacted the American way of life throughout the 19th century, and its transforming effects continued far into the future. It changed how the economics of business and trade worked, and it was a major factor in developing the West. It transformed American culture by encouraging immigration and led to a new perception of the frontier and environment. The Union Pacific Railroad, as the first railway to span the continent of North America, laid the groundwork for a mass transportation system like no other, including the construction of new transcontinental railways. The railroad was and is a reason America stands where it does today. For better or for worse, the Transcontinental Railroad single-handedly changed the course of American history forever.